Okay, hi everyone. I'm Jimson Lee for speedendurance.com and welcome to the second edition of the ParaCoach Athletics Tokyo Paralympic Club. We got an action-packed session tonight, lots to talk about. We're actually going to extend the session a bit beyond 90 minutes because we have just way too many topics to go through. So again, welcome to all the panelists who made it again, and a lot of new faces as well. So great to see everybody. First person I want to introduce is Frank Dick. I think everyone knows who Frank is. He's the president of the European Athletics Association. And he's one of also a UK inspired business speaker. And Frank is considered one of the coaching greats, having led the British athletics team during the golden era of track and field or athletics. Welcome, Frank.
Oh, welcome. Thanks for that kind introduction. Well, folks, although I've been introduced as the president of EACA, the European Association, which is appropriate because it was the European Athletics Coaches Association who felt that it would be a good idea for us to somehow or other, for Europe at least, to create a coaches club with the Paralympic Games. Now, to give you the forerunner of all of that, the other role I have is as chairman of the Global Athletics Coaching Academy, which is the athletics body, the right arm of coaching for world athletics. It's the coaches center. And one of the things that we tried as a venture, because we've only been in existence just over a year, one of the things we tried was to create the notion of a World Athletics Coaches Club on the occasion of every major championships. So, for example, coming up next year for the World Indoors, for the World Juniors, and for the World Seniors in Eugene, there will be a World Athletics Coaches Club. Now, when this idea was started, it was before COVID, and it was before we were communicating the way we are right now. And my vision at that point was quite simply of a place where coaches could meet physically at a major championships when they didn't have accreditation, they weren't with teams, but they needed a place to network, to maybe get a bit of CPD in there, to listen to interviews with top coaches. We tried it before back in 2012 for all sports. Now I'm wanting to tighten it down for our own sport. But then when the Olympics came up, I had this idea of perhaps trying out a virtual version. So I first of all suggested to Oceania, not being brave enough to try it from Europe straight away, I asked them what they would think of this idea. Within 24 hours, they came up with an idea of 2 or 3 panel sessions linking Tokyo with Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania. So then I mentioned this to Giacomo Galetto, and Giacomo said we could do it every day. And Richard Mercado did something in the Katka. In Asia, 4 of the regions of Asia decided to grasp this and get up and run with it. So now we had a situation where you could not only have an on-the-ground coaches club, but you could have a virtual one. The one on the ground being organized by World Athletics, who have agreed, by the way, that in every World Championships going forward, any nation who wishes to host must be willing to offer a free venue for the coaches club. So we've got the stuff organized on the ground. Then came the idea, well, why can't we then get the areas to organize their own virtual coaches club, linking in to the in situ one on the ground? And that's where we've got to, folks. But then it occurred to my colleagues in Europe, Sean is the treasurer, Jimson had been our host throughout the games, and Giacomo. We thought, well, why not test the water with Paralympians? Because I don't see anybody doing anything for them. So we grasped the nettle. I was privileged to be introduced to Tabo Huntley, who I'll introduce to you in a second, by Paula Dunn. And he immediately said, well, we could do that. The John Moores University in Liverpool would be very pleased to support this. And what about bringing in people like Peter Eriksson, who you've also got with us, who also got with us today? So that's the start, folks. So what we agreed to do is to try to do one at the beginning and one at the end of the championships, with a view to seeing, well, where could we take this? Where can we take it in the future? Can we make this something more permanent, bigger? Can we link it to the World Athletics ventures? It's an open door for us here. And that's what I hope you'll be thinking about by the time we get to the end of the session tonight. This is our future. So that's the whole background to this. One final throwaway line. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock UK time, another thing that we do in World Athletics is called Coaching Matters. And the session tomorrow is about coaching diversity. So we look at women in coaching, we look at disabilities in coaching, we look at ethnicity in coaching. And we're asking ourselves the question, is it appropriate to be represented proportionately in our organization of coaching according to what the ratios are out there in the sport as a whole? There'll be some great speakers on tomorrow. If you're interested, I'm pretty sure Jimson or Peter can send you a link following this, and it'll be great to see you tomorrow. But meanwhile, let's get on with the business tonight. My huge pleasure to introduce one of the architects of this whole program, Tabo Huntley.
Hi guys, I won't take too long. We want to get into the meat of all of this. Thanks, Frank, and thanks for contacting me with regards trying to put this together. And also thanks to Jimson and Peter for backing this. And we've had some great chats on WhatsApp along the way. In terms of my background, I'm an academic at Liverpool John Moores University in the UK. My speciality is around coaching pedagogy, and also looking at coach learning and development within Paralympic sport. So that was my PhD area. We've written on this a few papers, which links into coach education as well. I'm also a coach as well, although I've had 4 years out just to finish off my PhD. But I have coached para athletes. I worked with the British Paralympic Association as talent manager for a few years. So I'm kind of infused within the environment in some way or another. And when Frank asked me about putting this on, I was thinking, great, what we're doing here lines up with the research, which suggests that, coaches are keen to learn, are learners implicitly, but there's very little opportunities to learn, to share knowledge, and to collate that knowledge or even build on that knowledge over time. So I'm very excited by, what we are doing here, and hopefully, as Frank alluded to, hopefully we'll carry that on. Before I hand on to Jimson and Peter, I also just want to make you aware of the Celebrating Disability Sport and Physical Activity Conference, which we're holding in November 11th and 12th here at Liverpool over 2 days. This will be a great opportunity to kind of network. We've got the likes of Penny Briscoe, who's going to be keynoting, as well as Paula, and some other great coaches who are also sharing their journey as well. But it's just an opportunity. It's heavily subsidized. I think it's about £25 for the 2 days, because it's heavily subsidized by the European Union. So it's a great opportunity, and you're all invited to come connect and have a drink as well, a couple of glasses of wine, probably, hopefully. But yeah, without further ado, I'll just hand it over to Peter and to Jimson.
Hey, thanks, Tabo. So yeah, the link for the conference is in the chat. It's in Liverpool, UK, in November 11 and 12. We have a lot of events, a lot of great panelists on board tonight. So let's go one by one, introduce them one by one as we go through the events. So I'll start with the first panelist, and that's Peter Eriksson. He's one of the world's most decorated Paralympic coaches, having coached a number of multi-medalists and wheelchair racing events. Peter has also been the head coach of Olympic and Paralympic programs in both UK and Canada. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I have a big laundry list of things to talk about. So let's talk about performances. Number one, I'll give an example. 100 meters, Johnny Peacock, Great Britain, 3rd Olympic Games, runs a PB, but not good enough for a medal, or just barely wins a bronze medal. What can you say about the quality of performance in the Paralympics in the last few games?
I think what we see here has been phenomenal performances by athletes. I mean, the standard have increased in many events, and we knew that the track was fast, so we're going to see a lot of fast times. And I was surprised by jumps as well. The standard has increased quite a bit. The one thing that is worrying me is the level of classification, which is a huge subject. You can see some classes that had the world record on 34 meter in a throwing event, and then suddenly the first throw the new guy had was 45. So then you wonder, is this really right? And I think this is something that IPC needs to work harder on in order to get it right, because I also see in wheelchair racing that the true quads division in the 51, 52 is being so diluted, it's not really any quads left in the racing. It was surprising to see also a lot of countries that is coming up in the medal table, like Azerbaijan, for example, and Uzbekistan, and even Iran has moved up quite a bit. I mean, Great Britain has always kept the standard in the top 5 with let's see how many medals I have it up here, 24 medals, which is great to see. But overall, fantastic performance, but a lot of questions.
Anybody want to start the ball on what Peter said? Any questions?
Just for me, Jimson, and obviously echoing what Peter said about the other nations, I think 41 nations won medals in Tokyo on the para side, which is far different from what it was in London and what is in Rio. So I think it's not that, obviously the classification is always questions, but other nations doing more to get people into those events, like Ecuador, in the F20 women's shot put, come out with the 2 sisters, they go and both of them break the old world record, and come first and third, and with Ukraine in second. I think there's just more nations doing more to get people into events and classes, and obviously there's questions over a lot of it, and obviously that seated throws, the world record being broke by 8 meters was astounding, and I think the top 3 went over the old world record. So there is people definitely pushing forward.
No, definitely. And just before I forget, so Ryan Jones is also one of our panelists, and for those who don't know Ryan is a retired Welsh international thrower who now works as a national throws lead for Welsh or Wales athletics. Ryan coaches a number of athletes, notably Paralympic and world champion gold medalist Aled Davis in the F42 class. So that's who Ryan is. So Peter, is there anything you want to say back to Ryan or his comments?
There was a question for me there in the chat. We forgot to tell people to put in questions in the chat, right? Yeah. What made the track so fast? I think it's a thinner layer of Mondo, if it is Mondo they're using, on top of pretty hard surface under. So that could make the difference, but depends on what type of surface they're using and how hard it is also. It's hard to know when you haven't been there.
Peter, can I say something? Peter, you mentioned a very important point about, the quad class almost disappearing. And then you also mentioned about, other nations coming up. I mean, whose problem is it about, when we see certain classes deteriorate or just sort of almost make an exit? Is it, is it something that maybe federations need to lobby the IPC to make sure that there's equal representation? Or is it just that maybe nations will not want to really support athletes who have maybe high support needs? And secondly, when you talk about seeing different countries coming up, that is a bonus. That is really well and good. But I think there's still a very big challenge whereby we will see the poorer nations are still not fully represented in certain events. You do not expect to see many wheelchair racers from the developing nations. You do not expect to see, for example, athletes in Johnny Peacock's class and stuff like that. But this is because of the technology and the money that that really has to be put into some of these events. So I just don't know, maybe, when when this forum is going on. I just don't know how maybe the best way to support these developing nations, for example, or how to lobby the IPC to really try and close that gap, or close it or bridge the gap.
I think that IPC tried at one time to do a third development countries support with equipment, but the equipment that they were giving out was so poor, so you couldn't really use it for any competitions. So it was a great starter wheelchair, whatever it was that they gave away, but then you couldn't use it in an event. And now the pricing and the ability to get racing wheelchairs is tougher and tougher, because as you saw on Marcel Hug's share, that's a specialized share from, I believe it is from Honda, and it's very selective few that can race in it. Otherwise, you have a combination of aluminum and shares that is on the market, but it's very few manufacturers. And even worse so is with the sitting throwing frames, because you have to make it yourself. And I think if it would be something that IPC can do, is to have an international development program. I'm sure they have it, but I don't think it's reaching where it needs to reach. The other thing that was also concern for me when I looked at it, since I come from the coaching wheelchair racing, is the amount of event that disappears off the schedule due to restrictions from IPC. There was 15 guys on the starting line in the marathon, where you actually could have had 50, 60, but they put the standard up so high, so it limited them, the ones that can go there. And they also cut events, the 10,000, the 200 meters, which is the biggest event really that you have in the T54 class. And they're also threatening to take away other events as we move along. But they run into a lot of opposition against that when they try to change and take away events. So it's a lot of questions around the equipment for third world countries, as you said. And there is a lot of questions around the events, because IPC once signed a deal with the devil, being the IPC in this case, that it can only be 4,000 athletes at the Paralympic Games. So now when new events are coming in, like canoe, rowing, whatever it is, they have to cut somewhere else in order to host those events. So the ones that is going to get cuts is swimming and athletics, because they have most events and most athletes. So they have to look at combining, I think, more classes in order to host it in a way, or stop bringing in so many new events, whatever comes first. I don't have a really solution for it.
Okay, we've got two hands up, Frank and then Sean. Frank, the question?
This is going to sound very naive, but you're going to have to level the playing field here sometime. And I don't know whether you do that on an economic basis of the cost of kit or cost of equipment, or you standardize equipment. But if you don't do this, you're simply going to have a huge gulf between the ones who people who are in there able to get medals, and the other ones who really are just make weights.
Okay, Sean had a hand up. I'll introduce Sean. He's one of our panelists. So Sean Pickering is a throws performance lead for UK Athletics and the team coach for Tokyo 2020 and London 2012. He's also a member of Great Britain's Olympic team in Atlanta in the shot put in '96. Sean, you had a comment to make earlier?
Yeah, only my experience with Paralympic throws was with Peter in the lead up to 2012, when I was quite heavily involved in coaching some athletes. Now Ryan's taken over that duty. I'm pleased to say, from a personal point of view, to see him develop. But I think there's a big part, as Frank just said, you've got to level the playing field somehow. And we have two big issues here, as Peter just addressed, the the limit on the number of people, that also has an impact in athletics, because we have so many individual classes and so many events within each individual class that the timetable then becomes an issue, because you can only have a certain number of events. And so therefore you can only have, one long throw going on at each time, or one event on the track. And that becomes a problem. So they're also selecting events where you can have groups of people that don't take up too much space or time in the timetable. So there's lots of shot put competitions, but not a lot of long throw competitions. And you do need to come up with some standardized equipment, even if it means increased accessibility, like for example in seated throws. If they were to limit the seated throws to certain chairs that were also flexible in their use, so they could be used by different people, it would also decrease the time that it takes to host a competition, because at the moment they're having to tie people in, set them up, all individual chairs. If you had one chair that was actually able to be designed that could then be modified quite quickly with a standard chair kept in place, you could get through more people. And also that would limit the expense. It would limit the expense for other people. It's a bit like in some of the motor racing programs now, where they standardize the chassis and they standardize the car, and then they allow the engine manufacturers to develop technology to try and improve the system. But when Marcel Hook's chair costs 50,000 euros, that limits an awful lot of countries to having a competitive athlete in T54 class. You just can't keep going with that. We have to have more people coming in, and we have to increase the possibility for that by limiting the costs.
Okay, Tabo, you have your hand up there.
Sorry. Yeah, just an observation on that. Cycling do this. For a piece of equipment to be accepted within the kind of the games, that piece of equipment has to be available on the open market with a certain amount of time leading into the game. So everyone has, inverted commas, access to that equipment. So there's some element of standardization, but you're right. I think the challenge is, it's an economic one, and I think when we spoke to Hannah Cockcroft not that long ago, and she talked about her first chair costing £3,000. So, and that was difficult for her to get into an entry chair in the UK. So never mind trying to take that chair or even prosthetic limb into the third world countries, and that's probably someone's lifetime of earning. So we do. And we do need to level the playing field, and that will cost. But I think it's something that, will hopefully, if there is a will, it can. I think it can happen. You just need to get some tight manufacturing guidelines and make it available to all. And that's the only way you're going to be able to, like I said, ensure that ability is the true marker of success, not necessarily your economic value.
Good point.
Frank, you had your hand up about something?
Yeah, it's really to follow up on what Tabo's just said. Sean, maybe I got this wrong, but did we not actually in track and field at one point have conditions like that, where if something wasn't available in the open market, then it couldn't be used? It started off with shoes. It was then there was something to do with specialist javelins at some point, and also the fiberglass and glass fiber poles.
Well, that is there. It's why the shoe rule is there now, to avoid the technological lead. They've now trying to put some controls in. There's always been that kind of rule, but still, even if you say it has to be available on the open market, I'm sure a chair is available on the open market. It still costs 10,000 euros. So it's not the technology that's the limiting factor, except for the fact that those people that build it make it very expensive to buy into. And as somebody that's involved on a charity side of things, where people are asking us for support, it always makes it very difficult if a young athlete's coming to us and saying, "Oh, I've got no support and I need to buy a wheelchair so that I can start my career." And it's £3,000 because we can't. When we bought Mo Farah his first pair of shoes is completely different prospect. Somebody his buy-in is a £3,000 wheelchair or a throwing. maybe
But I guess you could cap the amount of money that could be spent on this or that piece of equipment.
Or standardize some manufacturer and have the Internet IPC come up, throw some money at some development so that standardization could take place, or at least the buy-in was much easier.
Okay.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
Thanks.
We got one. I want to get Peter's comments, and then I want to introduce Steffy Narius right after. Peter?
Well, the problem is you can't, I don't think you can cap the cost on it, because the ones that is doing it is one-man shops, basically, that is doing a racing share. The other thing is that the mistake IPC did when they did a share for third world countries was that it was not compatible, even in the hub size or wheel size, to a regular racing share. So it really was just an entry share and nothing else. And that's not what they need. They need an entry share, but they also need a follow-up on that so they can move on. And the other problem is, even more so, is that because of the different disability and balance, it has to be personalized so they sit right? And that's the problem of making one share that looks the same, because not everybody would fit in it, or they can't use it because of their balance or functionality.
Okay, I want to introduce Steffy Narius. She's a retired German Olympic silver medalist and world European champion in the javelin. Now she coaches at TBS Bayer and personal coach to Paralympic T64 long jumper and world record holder Marcus Rem. Now, I think Marcus made the news recently in a world record of 8.62, and he actually won his third gold medal, 8.18 at the games. Now, so Steffy, so welcome back. Thank you for joining. So all this talk about equipment is familiar. I mean, Marcus wasn't supposed to even jump until 3 days earlier, right? He wasn't allowed, and it wasn't until the last minute where they let him in the Olympics. Can you give me your thoughts about equipment and fairness, and after talk about his jump and how he performed?
Yeah, thank you, and hello together. Yeah, it's a good point. We have a cooperation in our club. That's not the cooperation in Germany. It's only a little club, Leverkusen. That's the name. It's near Cologne, and we have a cooperation with Otto Bock, and we have most of our athletes are prosthesis athletes. We have no wheelchair, and therefore I don't have this problem. And with this cooperation, we got some prostheses, and we can give it the young athletes. We go in a hospital and talk with these young people, and then they come with 6 or 7 or 8 years to our club and try to run with the prostheses. And we have in the basement a lot of things that they lay a lot of things, and they can try that. You got this feeling what's happened with me when I have the first time the prosthesis under my leg or what else, and that's beautiful what's happened with these little kids. They see, okay, I can run a lot of faster, and therefore, yeah, we are in our club, we are good. Yeah, it's a good performance to have this cooperation with Otto Bock. It's much more easier. But I don't know more about wheelchair. I think that's a really big problem to support this. Yeah, really expensive. Okay, but I don't know about this more.
I just wonder why he wasn't allowed to jump or until 3 days before. I missed that one.
I'm not sure if I understand what wasn't allowed to the 3 days before.
Well, Jimson said that your athlete wasn't allowed to jump until 3 days prior to the event, or enter. I don't know what the story was.
I don't know too.
Jimson.
Yeah, I'll send the link in the chat. There was some controversy about his eligibility to compete. I'll put the article in the chat, but I guess it's always best to ask the coach, as you know, you know best, right?
Paralympic or Olympic? His
Paralympic.
controversy was on the Olympic, not Paralympic. No? Strange.
Olympic. Oh, what?
Okay.
Yeah, it was one week before the Olympic long jump competition. He got a it was not allowed to jump, but it was not the reason from the proceedings. It was, I don't know.
You can't trust the media. Okay, Peter, hand up, but that was it. Okay. So speaking about, we're talking about fairness here, and I mean, if you look at the medal table, you know, once again, the RPC, the team formerly known as Russia, you know, they end up coming in fourth in the overall medal table, right? 118 medals. You know, they're not even supposed to be allowed to compete, but they are there. And, you know, it's no doubt that this sport is definitely technology based. And so anybody have any comments about maybe Frank, or you want to talk about should they be here, or the Russia or the formerly Russia team be allowed to compete in these games? Right?
My personal view is that there's really serious equivocation in all of this. You're either disqualified or you're not disqualified. I feel very sorry for those athletes who've chosen to play fair and so on. But the whole idea is to put pressure on the federation to play fair themselves with the world. And I personally, I just don't subscribe to the idea of a kind of a substitute team going in there, because it is Russia for whatever, by any other name. That's the fact of life.
No, definitely. Anybody comments on that? It is what it is. You know, Olympics are in 3 years. It's not going to change. So, okay. Let's move on to, you know, some controversial stuff like the wheelchair events. Apparently, the IPC plans to, you know, get rid of the wheelchair events. Is there anybody, Peter? Any comments on that?
Yeah, I can continue talking about that, because I think there is sneaking under the radar in order to eliminate wheelchair races. They're setting either a standard so high or the limited number of entries. So then in the future they can out events. And I think that I heard many years ago that their plan was to have 3 track events and then take away the marathon, for example. And they have already started that, as I said before, with the 200 and the 10,000 and limiting the number of entries to marathon. And even in the other event, there is more. If you look at the world ranking in the T54 class, there is a huge amount of people that could qualify or go to the games for the regular track events that you don't see there, because the standard is set so obviously off what it should be. And I think it's worrisome, because really the wheelchair sport originated the Paralympics when it started in the UK. But now, as I said before, they need to make room for other events and other classes and other disability groups. For example, the intellectual disabilities has come in, they were not there before. And then the next thing that's going to happen in Paris is this race running, which is for the more, the higher disability group for cerebral palsy. And they don't have more than 3-4 on the world ranking, and they're saying we're going to take away events that has 60-70 people on the world ranking and replace it with 3 or 4. Then the question is Paralympics a developmental event or is it a high performance event? I think IPC have to make up their mind on that. In my mind, it should always be high performance, and the development should go to regional events such as European Championship or Pan Ams, whatever it is, Commonwealth Games. And then not just throw in developmental events. If you can't fill the lanes, don't have the event. That should be rule number 1. And make sure that the standard is less stringent, so you have more athletes on the track in those groups, which has a huge base of ranking. But I think the way they're doing it now, they're killing wheelchair racing. Amen.
Okay, I think Ryan had a question or hand up comment. Or
Just to really echo Peter in IPC's decision or where they want to go in terms of, do they want to go down the performance route or do they want to go down the mass participation? Obviously, there's arguments for both sides, but it depends where they want to go with it. Do they want to go down, get into Diamond League events, or do they want to create their own sort of event where it can become a global sport with a global sort of following? I think that's where they want to go. And like Peter said, bringing in experimental events at sort of a Paralympic stage is probably too late in the pathway. It needs to be started lower down, so they can grow the numbers. There's numbers or there's events not at the Paralympics that have 20, 30, 40 people within an event across the world. And then you have some that are there with 3 or 4. Obviously, there are financial implications, obviously, like we said about the wheelchair racing. So, they need to do something to make sure, I guess, everyone has the ability, because you see these developing nations like Ecuador, like Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan had 6 medal winners in Tokyo they didn't have in Rio. They weren't even in the sport in Rio, and all of a sudden they got 6 medal winners. 4 of them are winners 4 years later, and it seems to be easier because of financial constraints and technology they don't have to get into those ambulant classes and sort of the learning difficulty classes. It's more accessible.
okay, Annie or Anne, you have a comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, Ryan, that's a good point. But also, let's not forget that there's always been these rumors that will probably soon become reality that athletics stands on its own. Para-athletics stands on its own, as in independent from IPC. So I think, to me, if that is going to be the case, you would think that this is the right time for them to start preparing by really making sure that there's good representation, and instead of maybe just reducing or killing off some events, to try and find a balance. I would really like someone from IPC or from the World Para-Athletics to really explain maybe where they see this movement in the next maybe 10, 15 years. Do they see it as a movement that is still going to be, sort of just to maybe only include a certain group of people, only certain nations? Or do they see it as the more it sort of like wants to be on its own, maybe think of holding their own diamond leagues, like just world para-athletics diamond leagues and stuff like that? Then they have to just start growing it. They should make it rich. They should sort of like try to increase the depth of the competition and stuff like that.
Good point. Two hands up, Sean and then Peter. Sean?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Anna said as well. But the Paralympics should be seen as the pinnacle of the triangle, and we need the development stuff at the bottom. But that has to be done in a national level. That's where you encourage people to come in, and that's where particularly I think standardization of equipment and opening up to as many people as possible is very important. And the shop window at the top is what's going to try and attract more people in, but they have to come in at that local level, whether that's a club or a national level, and competitions have to be available to them. And I think the IPC is in a difficult situation because they're trying to serve two masters, and they don't have the structure underneath like the athletics, the World Athletics has in terms of the national federations and club systems that are feeding into that. And so, they have to sort of make a separation with what needs to be at the top level that's going to attract and be the shop window to hopefully bring more and more people in. And it's difficult. Look, we know how difficult it is to bring money into the able-bodied sport at the moment. So to think about bringing in money into disability sport at a top level, like for a Diamond League, for example, is a bit pie in the sky at the moment. We have to rely on the groups lower down to try and bring that in through a participation route and the numbers route, and make that happen by driving the bottom up, I believe.
Okay, Peter, before Tabo.
Yeah, so I agree with Anne and Sean talking earlier. I think that the problem is, even if athletics becomes independent, there are several things with that. The Paralympic Games will still be controlled by IPC, so they decide what events is going to get in there. IPC has a problem; they don't have the funds that the IOC has, for example, and they're heavily depending on IOC giving them charity funds to run their events. I think that we're going to see the one person I talked to that was a high on the inside of IPC. He said like this, that IPC's board of directors don't have the high performance mindset as you would see in IOC, and therefore development will always be part of the Paralympic Games. And that to me is not serving the right purpose with the Paralympic Games.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Tabo, back to you.
Yeah, just a quick observation. I don't know if I've been a devil's advocate here or not, but I believe that the IOC and the Olympics has a developmental arm. So I think if you look at the qualifiers for the Olympics, there's some athletes that will only go and do round one. Granted, there'll probably be 3 or 4 rounds, 5 rounds of particular events, but actually when you compare, you know, if you look at the Olympics, if you're going to be talking about the pinnacle, you know, shouldn't there just be semi-finals and final, for example? At what point do you decide what is the pinnacle? So when you think of Paralympics, they also have that, they're trying to be elite, but they also have probably a wider developmental arm. So I think the two, it gets a little bit muddied. That's one of the observations, but also I think, and you know, again, just throwing this out there, there are a number of athletes within parasport and across parasports who compete in sprint events and endurance events. That does not happen at the Olympic side. So my question is, why is that? And should someone who is a sprinter, should they be doing a marathon? To me, physiologically, that, you know, either we don't have enough sprinters or we don't have enough competitors. But I find that, you know, from a physiology background, that doesn't compete in my mind. You either sprint, you do your 1s, 2s. You don't even, you know, sprinters don't even necessarily go to 4s. So there's even a break when you go 4s, and then you either a 4 or a 2, or a 4 and an 8. But after that, it's a completely, you know, it's a completely different energy system, you know, type of body shape, etc. So I think there's, you know, and it's quite possible that as we, you know, promote the Paralympics across different nations, that we will start to get, you know, maybe some different physical specimens that are tailored to one particular type of event as opposed to a range of events. Just a thought.
Yeah, but the other thing is also with money. If your home country gives you $20,000 for every gold medal you win, I wouldn't do the marathon. I'd rather do the 100, 200, 400, 800, and 1500, right? You have 5 chances of winning a medal than running one marathon and losing by half a second, like this lady did. Peter, your comments?
Yeah, the only thing is, I think you were referring to wheelchair racing, which is quite different. I don't know if there is any runner that does the longer event, but wheelchair racing is quite different because it's not weight bearing, for example. That's one thing. The other thing is, if you're a good sprinter, you can sit in the draft on the longer races and just wait until it's 200 to go, and there you go sprint, right? So that's why you see that carryover. But if you look at the outcome of the marathon, for example, was none of the sprinters that was even close to the podium, except Brent, but he couldn't do it because he had to pull too much, and then it didn't work out for him. But anyway, that's a side comment.
Okay, any more comments before I change topic slightly? That's it. Okay, I want to talk more about coaching now. I want to go into the preparation and performance of athletes. I don't know if Ryan or Sean can talk about some throwers. Were they affected by the COVID year? Were their preparations on target? And is there a big difference between peaking and periodization for a Paralympic versus an able-bodied athlete? Ryan or Sean, want to take a stab at that? Sean? No? Sean?
Ryan's the one that's involved.
Yeah,
Ryan's the one.
Thanks. In terms of affected by COVID implications, I think in Wales where we're based, it was my athletes who were also affected quite highly. We had Aled who won the F42 or 63 shot put. He was throwing off a wooden circle in his back garden for 8 months of last year. Lifting in his garage. Same with Kyron Duke. He was, he didn't have the opportunity to lift or have the space to throw in his house. We had to adapt quite a lot. I think with the COVID, and this is what I experienced at the games, I think it just adds a lot of extra pressure, worry, tension to any athlete. Being PCR tested every single morning, having that possibility of being a close contact. Now you've got to isolate till you get your PCR test. Obviously they need to take care of themselves, but I just think that extra worry affected a lot of athletes, and I'm sure it did on the the able-bodied Olympic side as well. Whilst we're out there, and in terms of peaking or I can't really speak with Aled over the last couple of years. He likes to peak for that one event. He likes to, when we first started, he wanted to throw his best event or best throw at the day. So we kind of just focus on that one. He is very specific. He needs 6 competitions. He needs 6 weeks leading into it. Peter, I'm sure he's changed quite a lot since you were heavily involved with him, in 2012. So, I think Tony's got a question as well.
Yeah, Tony, your thoughts, please.
I was just I wasn't trying to interrupt you, Ryan, but I was just going to say one of the reasons why the U.S. team, in our opinion, did so poorly is that we have a leadership issue. More importantly, they were more interested in selling a package of having the Olympic trials, the para swim team, the para cycling team, and the para track and field team all having their Olympic trials on the same date. And that we actually picked our team or had our Olympic trials on June 10th and 11th, 12th. And, so we had 2.5 months to try to keep these athletes physically fit, mentally prepared, all the way into, when the Paralympics started in August 25th. And that was a difficult position because, one, there weren't very many competitions. They tried to have camps and stuff like that, but the focus wasn't there. And it's just hard to do that, especially in light of COVID in the United States, the Delta variant and stuff, and the uncertainty if we're even going to be going, that was added difficulty. So, we did, secure several medals, but part of the problem is, again, getting back to the original question, the original statement, is the teams being limited. Like Sean said, you're serving 2 masters, and or actually Peter said that we're going to continue to develop third world countries or developing countries, but we're going to be limiting the bigger countries that have the financial resources to grow the sport, by limiting their participant level. And I'll just add one little thing from the beginning comment you guys had about the track in Tokyo. I had a meeting with the Mondo people. That track, there's only 2 of them in the world that the warm-up track and that track. They actually designed a special polymer for that stadium, and that stadium track is going to, or that composition is now going to be on sale starting next year. So that track was designed to be super fast, and there's no other track other than those 2 tracks in Tokyo like that in the world.
So I hope they're going to do something about the javelin run-up.
Yeah, the javelin runway is too soft.
Oh, yeah.
That's another story. Okay, Peter, you had your hand up.
Yeah, the other thing we have to remember for Paralympic Games too, when it comes to performance, is it's quota based. So if you look at the Canadian performance, for example, and saying they finished 25th, which is the lowest they've ever been, and then you look at the number of athletes they had, is the lowest number they ever had. So it's not, if you meet the standard, you can enter 3 athletes for every country. It doesn't work that way. And if you go down in the quota and get less and less, China is always at the 81 to 83 people quota for the games, while Canada, I think, is down to 15 or less, if I remember right. And how do you win even close to a number of medals that the top 5-6 countries have if your quota is just falling through the floor?
Yeah, no, good point. Sean?
Well, just from following on from what Peter said, that also encourages an athlete to do multiple events. If we're trying to broaden the base, then maybe we limit the athletes to the events they do and not have them do, 400, 800, 1500 and marathon, but maybe say you can do 2 events and then maybe some other athletes come in, but you can't do that if the quota is limited, because people are trying to maximize their possibilities with the number of people they've got. So we're always limited by that. And just one other quick point, that talking about the timetable and the limitations with the number of events, one thing that was noticeable for me between the Olympics and the Paralympics was there was a lot of rain. We had a lot of impact of the weather conditions, but they couldn't change the timetable because, like, for example, in the Olympics, the women's discus, the rain started in the second round. They took the athletes off for basically an hour and let it dry. In the Paralympics, you can't do that because there isn't the time in the timetable. So everyone was out there, everyone was throwing all the way through the worst of the weather conditions. And it certainly doesn't help the wheelchairs also on that fast surface. The grip goes down. Okay, everyone's in the same circumstances, but when you think about some of the disabilities that we're talking about from a throws perspective, particularly, and Ryan and I had this discussion a lot, is, it's incredibly dangerous for some of the athletes, given their particular classification, to be able to stand up on that circle, or the risks that they have to put themselves under in order to try and compete under those conditions. And same with the heat, and particularly Peter spoke about it before, the heat regulation in the quadriplegics is adding another big aspect to it when you have those weather conditions to deal with as well. So.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else want to add to that? No, Frank or Ryan?
Yeah, sorry, just to add it, on the heat, I think with the seated throws, and this comes back to the frame tie down time in between throws coming in. One of the British athletes was on last in the seated shot put. They're waiting on the side of the track for 2.5 hours, in that heat. You can't tell me that doesn't affect their performance greatly. They're sat there for 2.5 hours, no air conditioning. Okay, you have cooling towels, you have ice vests. Yeah, that's okay. But in that heat, it's not going to help. You need to have 3 or 4 wheel seated throws areas all alongside one side. It makes it a bit more spectator friendly. It gets it going. You can't have an event going on for 3.5 hours. It's just not. It's not good for the timetable. It's not good for the athletes, and it's definitely not good for the spectator.
Okay, Anne, you had your hand up. Then Frank.
Just to add on what Ryan has said, I think the problem is that maybe maybe most people who put on these events, or the organizing people, do not have sufficient knowledge on disabilities and maybe the environments and what affects different disabilities. I am just very happy, for example, that that particular athlete was able to compete. She didn't pass out or anything like that. She was able to compete, but oh my goodness, waiting for more than 2 hours on the sidelines for you to throw with the kind of disability that she has, definitely it's going to impact on the performance. So I'm hoping that maybe these are some of the challenges, or these are some of the observations that federations will be feeding back to IPC.
Frank?
Yep. Yeah, no, I buy that, and I'm really enjoying the fact that you as coaches are examining so deeply, if you like, the management of the environment in which these athletes are competing. However, at some point before we leave coaching, I'd like us to look at the coaching. I'd like us to examine coaching, because we've not actually looked at that yet. Is there something that we should be better at as coaches to deal with the range of ability difference that we have in front of us? Is there something that coaching from the world of coaching should be bringing to the Paralympic movement? Because that's all we can, if you think about it, folks, we can put forward all these challenges, raise all these points, but it's up to somebody else to do something about that. We can't do anything about that. We're not in control of that. What we are in control of is our ability to coach and coach better. And really what I'd like us to look at, when we got the time today, is how do we do that? Because that we can control. We can change the world in that avenue, but we can't change the world elsewhere.
Good point there. Tony Campbell, your hand up, comments on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with what Frank's saying, but you know, another frustrating thing that I'm sure all of you guys have experienced is you have an athlete that comes to you and is best fitted for, say, the 200, 400, or the 1-2 or whatever, and that event is taken away from the program. You know, one of my Paralympic athletes won the bronze medal in the long jump at T13, but he's the world record holder in the high jump. And that record, I mean, that event was taken away from him a few years ago. So now he has to learn a totally new event. And he's, you know, we just added the 100 this year and he came in fourth. So, you know, it's just frustrating because you have these athletes that come to you and you're trying to constantly recruit athletes into the sport, but yet their abilities don't match what their classification, you know, offers them. And that's one of my frustrations with this thing. But again, it's a limitation of the program. I know.
Yeah, definitely. Peter, you comments on that?
Well, I agree with Frank on the plan and the environment. And I think that it's many things that you have to put into your plan. And I'm referring back to my wheelchair coaching days, is that you see that a lot of athletes have a hard time in the rain and they're losing grip and so on. It's because they never train in the rain. It's like a pole vaulter, basically. They don't jump in the rain either. Then another thing that hit me quite again is that a lot of athletes come to big events like this and they don't understand their competition. They don't know their competition and they don't have a tactical plan. And I saw several of the top guys just choking on not knowing what to do next. And when you come to an event like this, you have to practice, you have to know your competition. And as Frank said many times, one advantage you have is to learn faster than anybody else. So evaluate your competition all the time so you know what's coming at you.
Actually, I want to ask a question to Steffi, actually. Steffi, how were the conditions for long jump? Was it too hot? Was it really sweltering?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. Yeah, it was quite a problem with Marcus. However, he felt very good, started very quickly, and actually couldn't do it on the board. And we still have to analyze everything in piece and then draw our conclusion from this. But it was definitely, he was too fast onto the board. And he said to me, Steffi, I don't know. My first opinion is I must do run up slower, but that's not the object from the long jump. But he don't find this feeling on the board what he has normally, and it was a little bit, yeah, I don't know. He was it's ridiculous, but he was too fast on the board for his performance. It was not so optimum on this board, and therefore it's a good run up and a good Mondo Belag, but yeah, you must train it a little bit and maybe for the preparation for Paris, you just have to see if you can really improve something on the prosthesis, which may then be geared towards high speed. Maybe you need to start at a certain speed, like the pull ward, actual harder prosthesis, depending on the level of the train. I don't know.
Okay. Last question on Marcus. So how was his preparation for the upcoming year? Was he affected a lot by COVID, lack of competitions in general? Was it a good year or not so good year?
No, it was the best year from all the last 10 years. He had the best performance the whole year. long jump the world record this year, and it was a good level, or it is a good level. And we have only 3 or 4 weeks we couldn't train, but the rest of the part in Germany, you are the best athletes in this event, and therefore it was no problem to take a training in our club.
It's good to hear. Like I said, 3 more years until Paris. So we have another guest here, Frank. Before we go to our guest, Frank, one last.
Yeah, very quickly. Forward to Dan's the big show tonight, so really looking forward to hearing Dan. But let me come back to this point about an athlete arriving in a situation where something beyond his control or her control has him or her faster down the runway than they've ever experienced before. How on earth do you prepare somebody for that? Because that is absolutely out of their control, or the coaches. I mean, is it possible? Could we be briefed on something like that in advance, that this runway is going to do X, Y, or Z to your approach speed, so that the coach could at least anticipate something like this?
That's why we have like before London 2012 in Loughborough, we put down that particular surface because we know it makes a difference. It's on a long jump runway, it's 6 foot difference on a takeoff run up. So yeah, we had that. It's not something you want to train on all the time because it has an impact because of the hard surface. But in Loughborough, we have certain lanes that have the Mondo Super X surface on so that people can practice their pre-competition routine. But not everyone has access to that. But you still need to know, look, your run-up's going to be 2 meters longer with the same number of strides because it gives extra percent.
I mean, I don't know at this point, but do we know, do people have access to that material a year before, for example?
Not to the Tokyo track, because it's usually launched there, and that was the same thing. We did know in London, Mondo Super X was going to be used, and that was a standard available in the couple of years leading up to that. So, and we did therefore put Mondo Super X has been around for a long time. The Mondo surface now, as Tony said, this was a development of what was in Rio. They've developed again from Rio. They put a harder surface on the top that gives more pushback from the track. It doesn't let the spikes go in, so it's designed to be faster. And naturally, if you're putting in more effort into the ground and it's giving you back more, that means your stride length is going to be longer. It's a 8% improvement and 8% increase. We had the same thing back in, going in 2000. A lot of the girls missed out on the qualification in the long jump because they just weren't used to the runway. And I think they had 5 or 6 of the favorites went out in the qualification because they were all overstriding. And with only 2 warm-ups when you get into the arena, it's the only, you have 2 warm-up jumps, you go into the arena, the mistake everyone makes is then to try and move back a little bit. So it makes more sense to start your run up already 2 meters back and run full speed and then see how close you get to the board and then move forward on the second warm up. Because otherwise you're just guessing a little bit at a time.
Sean, I get all of that, but the point I'm trying to come to here is that surely if this is going to be an issue that's only going to arrive when you get there, there should be some condition in world athletics to the contractors who are responsible that this material must be available 1 year in advance.
Okay, hang on a second. So I want to introduce another guest here. We got Dan Pfaff on the call here. I think everyone knows Dan. He's the head coach at ALTIS, also a world leading masters coach who coached Olympic and Paralympic medalists, including Johnny Peacock and Greg Rutherford. And so Dan, welcome.
Thank you.
There he is, Dan. So you've been sitting here listening to us arguing about track surfaces and long jumping. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it was a perfect storm of 2 factors there. I'm curious, was Rem in the super shoes, the new model long jump shoes? Steffi?
Sorry, I don't understand anything.
Was he in the new model long jump shoes?
Yeah, long jump what? Shoes?
His spikes that he wore, and
Yeah.
was that the super shoe model?
Yeah.
All right, so now you got two variables. You got the super track and the super shoes.
Yeah, it was too much. But yeah, okay. He don't jump it in the competition. We jump it in the training sessions with this shoe, but not in the competition. Maybe it's a reason, I don't know, but it's a good point.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we have, yeah, we have a lot of issues with the track, but there has to be some kind of standard. So Dan, what do you think about standardizing track surfaces like we are for equipment, like we are for shoes? Do you think that will ever happen?
Well, let's be honest. World Athletics opened Pandora's box with these super shoes. It's been a shit show for 2 years there. So I'm not sure they're going to standardize tracks in the near future. Our leadership seems to be all about records and destroying history in the record books, so I don't really see a proactive measure on that front, sadly.
Yeah, no problem. We were actually talking about coaching before the call, coaching, periodization, preparations. Can you share some thoughts about Johnny Peacock? I know it's his third Olympics. He did fairly well, but can you share a bit on his preparations and how he felt about his bronze medal or dual bronze medal?
Well, I think at the end of the day, he was very disappointed. Johnny runs to win. He had a tough 18 months. My role is kind of advisory. So we do Zoom practices. So there's key sessions during the week where he'd set up multiple cameras from different perspectives, and we'd film that part of the session. And it's not like being there full-time as a coach because you miss a lot of background information and context. But we try to identify KPI sessions and KPI components of the session. And so each week we'd have several days where we had Zoom practices. And then at the end of the week, we'd have a debrief. Oftentimes his therapist was on the call. John did a great job of keeping Johnny together. Johnny had a tough year. He had a knee procedure. Countless times he was shut out with COVID, not able to train in areas. Most of his weightlifting was in the back garden with a portable heater that he would jump into a shed to warm up between sets and reps. I would say up until about March, probably 80% of his running workouts were in the street or in a park. Or sneaking onto the track at a local track. So it was definitely contingency planning, plan B type of year. He's experienced, and we've been together since 2011. So the debriefs and the check-ins and the Zoom conferences were primarily the mechanism that we used, for that 18-month lead-in. He was unfortunate, made some bad decisions in a training session in May and injured a hamstring, and it took a few weeks for that to calm down and turn around. And that was right when he was getting into the racing season. So I think he was somewhat race short. It takes Johnny a while to find his rhythm and race distribution model. And we weren't able to do back-to-back races as often as we wanted to prepare for the rounds. So there were some gaps, some caused by COVID, some by injury, and some by just poor decision-making, to be honest.
So how do you plan for like nasty surprises? Like, for example, Harry Mara would coach Ashton Eaton, and how do you prepare him for a bad day at the pole vault? Because if you know height and pole vault in your history, so he had his trick by going through this awful track and bad warm up and say, okay, here, go jump 520. What are your experiences in trying to prepare an athlete for the Olympics? Because the Olympics has so many logistical issues, because you have the heat, you have people waiting 2 hours, you have transport getting to the venues. Do you have any insight on surprises or how to handle surprises?
Yeah, well, I think master coaches constantly throw challenges at athletes in a variety of environments and situations. And you try to replicate, like with Johnny, he had some runners around. So we do handicap starts, you know, to mimic certain race situations. Hey, you're behind 2 meters, don't panic, or have him way out in front, have people run him down, you know, able runners, and keeping composure. So you try to set up all the scenarios, but that said, you know, as Frank was alluding to, you can't totally prepare for war. No general has ever totally prepared for war. So all you can do is, you know, outline the possible contingencies and landmines, and coaches that have been through this a few times, you know where the icebergs are in the landmines, like travel snafus. One thing we didn't know was the holding camp logistics and rules and regulations. So like in the Open Olympics, I had such disparity of what athletes could do and not do. One athlete was in a training center where they had to eat breakfast at 6 a.m. and train from 8 to 10 a.m. and that was it, and they were locked down. Where other holding camps, it was pretty normal. So, you know, I don't know how you ever prepare for that, but you just, you know, when the moment happens, then it's debrief time, come up with strategies, try to put the fire down a little bit, and let's march forward.
Great, good point. Just for other people here, feel free to ask Dan some questions on the chat or raise your hand on the Zoom. So one last question for Dan before I pass it to the floor here. Is there a difference in approach to peaking for a Paralympic athlete versus a able-bodied athlete? Is it the same? No?
I'll probably upset a lot of people here. I don't believe in peaking. I'm sorry. I think you taper, but generally, in my experience with world-class athletes, they have high level of performance for a certain period of time. So I think you can shape and taper and whatnot to have people really ready for a block of time. What I think the reason people excel is the stage they're on. You know, the emotions, the energy, the background, the aura or whatnot, that raises the level of performance. Like if peaking was really working, then why do so many people fail at the Olympics or the World Championships? Like only a few people got it right out of thousands. You know, and you know, there's really great coaches on this call that have had athletes get on the podium at the games and not get on the podium. So did their quote peaking plan fail? Now, you know, there's other variables around that. So I'm one of the outliers. I don't really believe in peaking. I believe that you can manipulate and taper an athlete to a high level of performance for a certain period of time. Now, of course, there's mistakes you can make the 10 days leading into the games or whatnot. But to me, that's just part of the tapering process and strategy. It's not really what I would call a peaking. I think in some sports, like weightlifting and swimming, where people just really reduce the volume, they do get a peaking effect. But those are more volumetric sports as opposed to power speed sports.
Good point. I don't see any questions here, so I'll keep on asking questions. I think everyone's shy. You know me, Dan, I can ask you all night questions here. So, okay, so other than the track, other than shoes, what are the big challenges for Paralympics? Let's start with track events, because that's what, well, most of us here are track and field events. What's the biggest challenge for, or future challenges for people in athletics, in sprints, for example?
Well, you know, I'm pretty biased. I think what derails the train more times than not is injury. And for, you know, 50 years of studying epidemiology and a lot of sports and whatnot, there's 4 drivers for injury: bad programming, bad biomechanics, bad lifestyle choices and habits of the athlete, and I'm sorry to say, incorrect sports medicine inputs. Those are the 4 big drivers when we study teams over time. So coaching wise, we can handle the programming a little bit. We can probably affect the biomechanics to some extent. Lifestyle, we definitely can have the influence on, but the medical side, we seldom have input or collaboration or whatnot. And I think that's the new frontier. when athletes have a great medical team around them and it works in a horizontal fashion and the silos are blown up, where everybody's on the same page working together and the network is very broad and diverse, I think that's where the future is. Because in my experience, the reason people don't evolve from junior or under 23 to senior is either burnout or injury. Those are the two most cited sources. And burnout, to me, circles back to these four drivers, bad programming or bad lifestyle choices or bad biomechanics that create an artificial ceiling to the performance, or just untimely or improper sports medicine inputs.
Okay. Is there any other athletes that you can discuss that were at the Tokyo Games that were under your mentorship or leadership that you can share with us, other than Johnny?
One of the guys I advise remotely is Trenton Merrill. He was a medalist in the long jump for the U.S. And then on the able side, I had Christabel Nettie, the Canadian long jump gal, and advisory role was Scott Simpson and Holly Bleasdale, and then Zach Zemek, the decathlete for the U.S. And several therapists and probably a dozen coaches. A lot of texting. The time zones made for a heavy 3-week period there. But most of it advisory. The only really direct athlete I had at the games would be Johnny Peacock.
Okay. Are there any questions for Dan? I don't see anybody having a question here.
Sorry, question, Dan. Dan, it's good to see you again. You're a master of the three-day rollover program. Can you kind of elaborate on how you use that in the build-up with Johnny into the games, given that you had all these constraints, environmental constraints, personal constraints, etc.?
All right, yeah. So I'll back up to give some context so people may not be familiar with it. So a 3-day or a 4-day rollover is, we've identified key types of training sessions that we absolutely have to hit to maintain fitness or improve fitness. So for Johnny, his 3-day rollover, we knew we had to get a block start acceleration type session in. We knew we had to get a speed session in, and then we had to have some kind of endurance session. And we kind of cycle on the endurance thing, whether it was alactic or special speed endurance or what have you. So those were the 3 workouts that were the main drivers of performance. Now, within those sessions, then we had to have complementary and compatible work. So on his Excel block start days, that's when we did power expression work afterwards and a pretty big hit in the weight room. On the speed day, we did more elastic training and elastic endurance after the speed runs. And on the alactic days or special speed endurance, we did more capacity type work in the gym or with lower level plyometrics. So the 3-day rollover, the idea is you should be able to expand it or shrink it and it still hold validity. So, there are some periods where he was healthy and John, the therapist, was on top of things, and we could train 6 days in a week. So we do day 1, day 2, day 3, then repeat day 1, day 2, day 3. And some of the lockdown periods, because we were having to come up with self-therapy and home therapy interventions, we thought that density pattern was too tight, too risky. So we spread it out. So you do day 1 on Monday, day 2 on Wednesday, and day 3 on Friday, and have a long weekend off to do a lot of self-therapy. So in the competition season, it depends on where the meetings are and whatnot. So he might have a race on Friday. So we do day 1 on Monday, a big therapy day on day 2, day 2 on Wednesday. Thursday would be a pre-meet type warm-up. Friday, he would do the comp. Saturday, an unwind workout. Sunday off. He didn't get to day 3 till the following Monday. So this is what I mean about expanding and contracting. It's about how you move the density patterns of the key sessions. And so that gave us wiggle room, and he didn't feel married to the program like, oh, I got to get 6 sessions in or it'll be a total failure. And Johnny had a lot of confidence in that because we've used it in competition phase all along. And so when we were implementing it in fall training and winter training because of lockdown variables, he had a lot of confidence in it. And actually some of his qualities actually rose. Some of his weightlifting numbers and some of his throwing numbers and jump numbers actually improved. And I might state that Greg Rutherford, the Olympic and world champion in long jump, he trained on a 3-day rollover cycle all year long, 9 years of his career. So I think a lot of people are married to, oh, we got to train 5 or 6 days a week to be super elite. And I think the density pattern doesn't necessarily have to follow that format.
Okay. So what are your thoughts about the number of events for the Paralympics? I mean, they have a finite number of events, and by adding new events, they have to get rid of some events. I guess none of your athletes are affected by that, but do you have any thoughts on those?
Yeah. Well, I did have a javelin thrower in the UK when I was there, Scott Morrison, that was, his event disappeared in the javelin. So I've been on the other side of that. I'm going to hold comment on the federation. The politics are all over the shop, and I really don't understand the science that they use. So I'll hold comment on that.
Sean?
Just to say, and maybe Ryan's a good person to talk about this, because Aled started off and took his first gold medal as a discus thrower, and then that event disappeared, and so then he then had success for the 2 next Olympic Games as a shot putter, but had to change the training quite considerably to do that. So went through that kind of experience. The events are going in and out, and hopefully 4 years in advance, so what you got the option to do. But sometimes it's not that. It's happening quite quickly.
Peter, you had a hand up?
Well, to Dan's and Sean's comments, this is because IPC is developing event. They don't see this as a high performance competition the same way as you would see in the Olympic Games. And this is the result of it. Events get pulled that has a high frequency of athletes in the ranking system, and they throw in an event where they have 3 on the start line, which is just ridiculous to me.
Just for me, adding and Sean, obviously Aled moved from that discus to the shot. Obviously training does take a change, but I think with the IPC and then WPA, they took out all of the events and just followed the Tokyo timeline for the 2019 World Championships. So then that kind of stunts the growth of those other events, like, for example, there's no F38 discus or shot put in the Paralympics, but there's an F38 javelin, which is, a totally different thing to throw and shot or discus. And then Paris, schedule may come out and they may have changed it again, or the LA schedule may come out and change it again. There's no consistency to develop athletes. You can't get athletes coming through if you can't have consistency. If that makes sense.
Okay. I have a question here. Actually, Peter, Peter, go ahead.
I also think that the whole thing with the events comes through the classification people, and the classification people want to see more disability groups coming in. I remember having an argument many years ago with the health classifier where they wanted to introduce T51 women into wheelchair racing, and I said, well, as far as I know, through 30 some years in the sport, I only know about 3 T51 wheelchair races I ever met, and 2 of them are dead. So now what are you going to do? And he said, well, you just have to develop. I mean, where am I going to find these people? It's really hard. And especially with more severe disabilities or less functional, that's really tough.
Yeah, definitely it's going to be hard to get a level playing field. I think we all can agree on that. I had a question for Dan, track training question. So we have a single blade sprinter here on the call, 200 meters, 100 meter sprinter. And he asked, like, what are your high level advice, because your body is not in balance. You got one side of the blade. Do you focus on the core? Do you train both sides equally? Do you train your weaknesses, your strengths? what can you say to this fellow sprinter?
Yeah, those are some great questions. I'm of the philosophy that you keep strength strong and slowly nudge the weaknesses and the gaps and the asymmetries and what have you. My complaint is if you focus on gaps, weaknesses, and whatnot, then strengths deteriorate. Now all boats are floating average, and you've probably destroyed the machine, so to speak. I'm a biomechanist by trade, so I believe that there is a technical model and there's certain bandwidths, and those bandwidths are driven by injury or compensation or disability. So a lot of this is understanding what are the bandwidths to movement expression on the various sections of the race, various times of the year of training, and having, you know, kind of red flag warning systems. Hey, if I'm in the bandwidth, my injury risk level is lower and my output levels are probably increased, so it's okay to train this section or this menu item. But if I'm 2 standard deviations away from the bandwidth, maybe we ought to adjust this menu item in the training session, or even eliminate it and go to a plan C type thing to cover our bases. So a lot of this to me is about management, having your model, knowing the sections of the race, knowing your bandwidths, and making smart decisions. So I alluded to earlier, Johnny made a really bad decision in May. He'd done a heavy weightlifting workout, and he felt some stuff in his back, and he just kind of blew it off. He woke up the next morning, he was stiff, and he was pretty tired from the session. And he had the option, he was on a rollover. He should have called, and we would have moved that session to Monday and put in some therapy, self-therapy things. But it was a beautiful day, and he knew that the local track, he could jump over the fence and get in for a certain period. So he jumped the fence, went in and tried to do a workout, and boom, the hamstring went. That was an athlete ignoring the red flags, ignoring his bandwidth homeostasis that he usually has for that kind of workout. So for me, it's a management thing.
Okay, Frank, comments on that?
Yeah, just to back up what Dan's just said there, I usually advise coaches that there's 3 orders of things. The first priority you have with any athlete is to coach their strengths. That's it, number 1 priority. A weakness only becomes a priority if it interferes with the strength, or if it interferes with the strength of other people in a team. A really simple model to work to, and I found it works pretty effectively. The other bit about technical models is I'm not a huge fan of that. I think there are technical principles, and some time ago when I was working with Boris Becker on the advice of Jon Tyriak. Tyriak came out with a line that I've remembered forever, and that is that all technique is compensation. Every athlete you work with is different, and they will all have their own compensations. And that comes back to Dan's last point. You have to manage that.
Okay, Tabo, you have your hand up?
Yeah, just as a quick question, really to Steffi, to Dan, and to Ryan. They are, well, biomechanically, physiologically, there are some bandwidths. Within the academic world, we are trying to figure out how do we monitor training load, whether it's internal, obviously external training load is pretty simple, but it'd be interesting to understand how much monitoring do you do throughout the season and into the lead up of the competition, and how much of that do you base on internal, or how do you assess internal training loads, and any tips around external training loads that you might have.
Who wants to go first? Steffi, you want to answer that one? Well, he's asking about training loads.
Maybe Ryan start first, because I'm not sure if I understand all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Ryan?
Yeah, in order to get into it, we with athletes use a lot of the gym aware stuff. So I kind of focus on sort of the speed and the speed of the bar within the weightlifting throughout the year. So we just monitor those speeds or those of the different rep ranges, and long as most lifts, for example, is under 2 meters per second in that lift, then we keep it there. If it starts dropping, then I'll adjust the program. But that's really what we look at is, you know, keeping the athlete healthy and moving everything quick throughout the year.
Maybe Dan answer that one. Dan, his question was about training loads in general.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of files and layers to monitoring. So for me, everything the athlete does is a screening process. So we have movement expression maps, and we have norms and normative data over time. So even the warm-up, you know, we've had warm-ups where you look at your group and say, hey, everybody in the group looks lethargic today or tired. Or, you know, you've had workouts where after the warm-up, you do the first menu item and people are just competing off the chain. Wow, everybody's really ready today. So coaches have been using things like posture, body language, tone of voice, you know, ventilation index, reactiveness, range of motion, things like that for centuries. It's called watching practice with a purpose. You can use all kinds of tech like GPS or Lavic guns, or, you know, simple things like My Jump apps. There's all kinds of jump tests you can use, pre and post training. For the internal factor, cognitive and whatnot, we do informal induction interviews every day with athletes, like how are you feeling, how sore are you, where are you sore, how did you sleep, what's going on in life, you know, how are your finances, you know, what do you think about this weather, it's raining sideways in 3 degrees, where does that put you? I debrief informally after every menu item. So if we do an acceleration workout, I'm debriefing in between sets, and then at the end before we go to the next. I do formal interviews at the end of the week. I send a text or an email with some key questions. And then each cycle, there's kind of a hybrid debrief where it's formal, then we discuss, and then it comes back to formal, and then we rediscuss. So there's processes there. I think for me, it's the induction and the debrief conversations that are probably the most valuable and reliable tool, and it's not rocket science. Coaches have been doing this since coaching's been around.
Hang on, before Frank, Steffi, did you want to answer or add to that, or pass? It's up to you.
I'm a little bit lost in this discussion. I don't know, maybe it's a jet lag. I don't understand so much.
Fine.
Yeah, I think when I understand it right, it's that what I want to say to Dan. It's absolute the same thing. I have a good relationship to Marcus, and we talk about all things in his life, and therefore that's pretty pretty good and very important to do all parts in his life. The mental, before Tokyo, it was a lot of press and a lot of interviews and a lot of things, and you must coordinate all things. And sometimes it's a little bit hard for a coach. It's normally not my job, but it is my job to organize this a little bit. But yeah, it's easy for me because Marcus is very, very good organized, and he know okay, sometimes everything stopped and I must be concentrate on the train. Okay,
good point. Frank, you had a comment earlier, or you're on mute? You're on mute.
It's really to follow up on Dan's point about sort of ongoing monitoring. The way I've always seen that is that there's kind of a before and after. We're all aware of just how important preparation is for all of us to get things right, whether it's for a meeting, whether it's for a training session, whether it's for a competition. And I think that the start of the big learning process for ongoing monitoring is in the preparation process. Immediately before you go into anything, there are two systems that are used in team sport that possibly we don't normally use in individual sport. One's called red teaming, where you imagine what the opposition can do to you before you go in. So, and I believe there's an equivalent of that we can play around with at individual sports. There's also something that's called pre-mortems. Now, the idea of pre-mortems came from the US SEALs when they captured bin Laden. And it was to imagine it all going wrong. Before you go into the arena, before you go out there, imagine the whole thing's gone wrong. Why did it go wrong? And this has encouraged you to examine yourself and just how detailed you've been and how strong you are in your preparation. But when it comes to the debrief, and this is, and I'm 100% with Dan on this, is that I think there are two levels of debrief. There's one that we call hot debriefing, and the other one's cold debriefing, naturally. The hot debriefing is immediately after the event, when the emotions are still running high, when the heart's still pumping, because you'll get honesty at that point. You'll get a level of feedback that you won't get once you've given an athlete enough time to think about the answers that you would like to hear. And that I'm not suggesting for a moment that athletes try to be dishonest, but it can happen that an athlete will give you a cosmetic explanation rather than the real one. And so the hot debrief, as soon as possible, is critical. If you look at teams like the Red Arrows flying people, they're actually debriefing the moment they land on their intercom before they get into the cold debrief. Then afterwards, when you've got all the data in the world that you're coaching in now, it's not the one I coached in several years ago, you've got a tsunami of data coming in. That, of course, has to be data managed properly. But then on that basis, you can do a very cold-blooded, calculated, analytical debrief. But all of these things add up to the ongoing learning process that the athlete's going through and that you have to go through as a coach to stay ahead of the athlete's game.
Good point. I know in my world, we call the hot debrief the post-mortem. So similar topic. Okay, we got like 10, 12 minutes left, and I'd like to get one more topic in. And this time I want to ask all the panelists. I'll ask them one by one. So the question is, I'll start with Dan first, since you're on my top screen here. What's your thoughts on the recruitment and development strategies for the sport? How can we build the sport bigger? Recruiting, coaching development, thoughts on that?
I think it starts with leadership and global vision. And then, you know, I've sat in a million startup meetings and planning meetings and vision meetings, and the ideas sound wonderful and everybody's in agreement, but there's no gatekeeper to enforce the action points. So what I see the fall down in track and field and in para sports in particular is there's no gatekeeper at the leadership level, whether it's nationally or federation or whatever, that's enforcing the action points that everybody's agreed upon, you know, for how to move the ball forward down the pitch. So to me, it's an accountability failure rather than a vision or, you know, schematic or planning failure. I think there's plenty of programs out there that work if the program's enforced and people are held accountable for the roles they've agreed to undertake.
Okay, good point. Sean Pickering, you're next. Your thoughts on recruitment and development strategies?
I think it's about preparation at the coalface. Where are those people? In terms of recruitment, we're usually looking at people coming in from a younger age group and bringing them into a sport, usually at club level. Or there's now more recently the military or people being injured and comes in at a rehabilitation point. So and both of those must be captured, but they have to be done in a different way, I believe. And I think, first of all, the role of a federation, and this should be more of a national federation rather than an international federation, but to make things more accessible and more easily available for people. And that should be something that is provided as support to clubs or the people that are at that first point of contact, that there need to be a bunch of basic racing wheelchairs or basic throwing chairs or these sort of things that are available for clubs to use on a regular basis, but also to bring in touch and try sessions in the same way that there is with, you know, you need to have it with throwing equipment or other things. You need people to get in and try it. And then of course you've got the different aspect, which is with the more recent military approach, is that you're reaching on a different level and already at quite a high level in their rehabilitation. It's then done slightly differently, but I think the performance element becomes more important there. Whereas the lower end, if we're trying to get people in, which we need to engage with more children with disabilities. We need to bring them in and use the Johnny Peacocks of this world to bring in the 8-year-old kid that just lost his leg because of cancer. You know, and that's what we have, these great superstars. They need to be used much more to bring in those people. But if we can't bring them in and let them go somewhere, we're lost. Yeah, we have to have the ability to welcome these people in at a young age group in a local level, because they're not going to travel length and breadth of the country. They've got to get it on their local track.
Okay, good point, Sean. How about Steffi? Your thoughts on recruiting or development strategies for the sport? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think what I talked at the beginning, that we support the young athletes. I had I had one athlete, it was Marcus, and in Tokyo, and I have another girl in javelin throw. She was the youngest girl in Team Germany with 16 years, a javelin thrower, and it was so funny. She got the first inspiration for this big games, and she said, "Oh, Steffi, I'm so nervous." But you must find this way to support these young people, to found it, and to, yeah, you give them the prothese or the wheelchair or what else. And in Germany, I think it's a little bit more a problem that you must go in this direction to more concentrate on some clubs. It's my feeling it's we have in a lot of towns in Germany, everybody will do something for disabled sport, but I think maybe in Dutch it's a good point that they are concentrate in some towns, and then you have good coaches in this area, and you have a good support, money support. And in Germany, it's also the problem that it's difficult to do only the sports. You must do another thing. You must do a profession or a study or what else. And the level in the Paralympic sport, it goes so up and so high that it's quite difficult to go on the same level with other athletes when you have so much.
Okay, that's good. So we got the American point of view, British, German. We do Wales. So Ryan, your thoughts on recruiting and development strategies? You're on mute. Yeah. On mute.
Great. So careful what I say, but to echo Dan is also that accountability in bringing people through. I think it's a wide range. Do we have coaches on the ground within clubs that one can identify talent, or do they kind of identify in coaching para athletes at all? I've been through the working with development for 10 years before moving into the performance side, and there's not a lot of coaches that would be willing to welcome in a para athlete, especially a seated throws or definitely a wheelchair racer. And I think the education has to go down to them. We have to be more focused, because athletics, athletes are not coming to us. It's not after 2012. They haven't seen this big lights in the show, and they want to be the next Johnny Peacock or Sophie Hahn coming, or Claire Duggan coming in after Hannah Cockcroft. We have to be more specific in what we're looking for and offer the opportunity.
Thanks, Ryan. How about the Canadian point of view? Peter, your thoughts on recruitment and development strategies?
I think that you need to have program on a local level and through the NSO, but you have to look at it differently. I think you need to hustle to find the people, and in the UK we were quite successful with that. I think it was 2.5 years, we had 170 new classified athletes, And the barrier to coaching that was mentioned by Ryan is mostly because they don't know where to turn to ask the questions about different disability. If they know where the central location is to ask questions when it comes to the different disability, it's an easier integration. I have only run into one coach that said, no, I'm not interested. And the only reason for that was he said, I'm going to retire in a year, so I don't want to take on any new athletes. However, what we try to do in many countries is to centralize the recruitment or development of Paralympic athletes. And that has proven not to work. So we're spending a lot of money on the Paralympic committee level in the nation, try to recruit and develop athletes, and that always, it's never been as successful as the money they're putting in. The return on investment is quite small. The difference within the Paralympic sport and the Olympic sport is that we can attract kids to come up through the system, which has its negative sides on it. But we can also get people in that is injured to accident or war and things like that. But they have to have a certain amount of time between the traumatic injury, whatever way it came about, to the point where they see, yes, I want to get in to be a high performance athlete. So when we try to recruit through the war program at the time in 2009 in the UK, the military was not allowing us in. So I think on the team in 2012, we had one athlete that was coming out of a war injury. And I think that changed quite a bit now because they have created their own recreational program leading into high performance sport. So that is helping the cause right now. But I think what is needed is that you have to have people that understand how you do recruitment development and get them into the sports to help them start up programs and how to do it. And it's very few that really knows how to do that successfully. And I think they're more willing to spend money on advertising and get new people in than they actually are to do the right thing in the programming.
Hey, thanks, Peter, for your thoughts. Two more people here. I'll do Frank and then Tabo. So Frank, final thoughts on recruitment and development?
No, just very quickly. I mean, I can't really add to the expertise that I've just been listening to. And my sincere thanks to all of you on the panel because you're so outstanding in your field. It just seems to me that the differences, because this is what I've been trying to work out from here. How can we, in world athletics, through the academy, create a program that will support you to be even better at what you do? And it seems to me that the only thing, you see, the world that I'm in, with able-bodied athletes all the time, is not about managing their environment nearly as much as your job is. You are not only coaches, you are deeply, deeply involved in managing the environment and their support systems. And so there's not much I can add to that latter, except to learn from you as to how we can actually build that into what world athletics will, or it really depends on you. If you want our support on this, if you want me to drive this through, I can do that. I can certainly do that for you and start to build a system through the idea of these clubs where we can actually build not only formal education for you in terms of coaching, but also help you with your own CPD and instant learning going forward through conversations like these. But once again, Jimson, if I can say to you, mate, you do a fantastic job as a host. Thank you very, very much for your job tonight.
You're very welcome, but we're not closing up yet. One last person, Tabo, your final thoughts on recruitment and development strategies, and then we'll pass it back to Frank for closing comments. Tabo, your opinion.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's from experience, really. I think you need the parallel tracks, athlete identification, talent transfer, etc., as well as coach recruitment and education. From the experiences before London, I was head of talent for the BPA, and through our talent days, and what we used was the BPA brand because people are familiar with that, and so we use that brand to move talent days around the country, and we invited all the sports to come along. And so, one, you're trying to promote para sports, but at the same time, those who are attending are able to, to have a go at different sports and find their fit. Now, I think through that process, we identified over 300 athletes that were deemed talented by coaches, and of which the big barrier was with the NGBs was around they don't have enough coaches to take on that many athletes, and so one of the I suppose that's why I'm now into coaching and trying to develop para coaching and other mechanisms across the EU. Is because we need to increase the number of coaches that feel confident and are able to coach athletes with different abilities and disabilities and whatnot. And so for me, it's the parallel track. It's interesting that we have more athletes going from athletics into other sports. So Laura Sugar has gone from athletes and now is gold medalist in para canoe. Kadina Cox does both athletics and cycling, but there needs to be that kind of openness around how do we transfer athletes between sports, and that's hugely complex, particularly when there's an amount of money associated with a particular athlete. But I do think there needs to be greater strategy, a unified strategy nationally and locally as well, but we need to empower coaches. We need to get more coaches who are able to support athletes with impairment. And I think that's what we're doing here, really trying to share that knowledge.
Yeah, good point. And if you want my opinion, since I can have an opinion too, I think we have a long way to go. Especially the international world. It's such an unfair advantage that we have in the Western world, civilized world. That's my thoughts. Sean, last comments before we...
I was just going to follow up by saying that I think that the Invictus Games has filled a very nice gap in that regard, because it is a great way of bringing war injuries and overcoming the trauma to that point that the sport is then first, most importantly, about well-being. And then it identifies some people from that then want to take sport onto competition and high performance. And the other side of that, though, is that because there has been a lot of support for the Invictus Games and the structure and the organization behind it, it also has paid coaches to come in and coach these people. And so it develops another level of coaches, because that's one of the big, as Tabo said, there are not enough coaches around that are prepared to take on or feel they're knowledgeable enough. Now that's also had an impact. Another generation of coaches has come through because there are people prepared to pay the coaches to work with those athletes. And I think that there's a lot of benefits that are coming from the Invictus Games in a number of countries that have bought into that. So just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, no, good point. That's good point. Okay, I think we're out of time. Frank, I'll let you some final thoughts, and maybe Tabo final thoughts as well.
Very, very quickly at the end. I've kind of summed up things from my point of view already, but I'd like to thank Sean, Steffi, Dan. Really good to see you again, mate. So long. It's been a long time. Tabo, Peter, Tony Campbell, Ryan. I think you've done a fantastic job tonight. I deeply appreciate the contributions you've made to your colleagues that are out there. I hope you all agree that this is something worth building on, the notion of a coaches club on major events going forward, so that we can learn from each other in real time. So please get back to me at some point and help me help you, if you like, going forward. Finally, Jimson, once again, mate, as I said, you're a superstar when it comes to. I'm surprised you don't have your own TV show by this time. You do a great job as a host. Thank you for pulling it all together throughout the Olympic Games, the World Juniors, and now, of course, the Paralympics. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Thanks for the kind words. And then Tabo, some final words on upcoming events. Tabo?
Yeah, guys, just again, thanks. I think hopefully this is just the start. I think there's appetite for us to develop this further. So any input through Jimson to myself, Peter and Frank will be really, really helpful. I'd love to get these types of discussions within a room, face to face, in some form of kind of workshop format. Hopefully we can move to that, because I think we can definitely build on this. And I'm just keen to also thank Paul Mosley here, who's not said much, but he's certainly been instrumental in developing some of the coach education within England athletics. So I'd be keen to try and draw at some of his insights in some other occasion. But for me, just thank you for your time and openness to share. Like I just remind you, we've got this disability conference, sport and physical activity conference in Liverpool on the 11th and 12th. It'd be great to see you. It's around coaching, but it does have we're trying to have a systematic approach in terms of high performance, the community to schools. So it'd be great to have you along. If we can put it online, we'll do it, because it's at the minute it's face to face. But thanks for your time, guys. It's been really good to see you.
Great. So thanks everybody. So once again, thank you all the panelists. We got Tabo, Frank, Peter, Ryan, Dan, and Steffi, and Sean. Thank you again for making time tonight. And we'll see you all the next conference, wherever that may be. Thanks all.
Good job.